the roadmaster basically turned to one of his guys and said, I need a cat. I need a cat right now. And of course, his guy's like, okay, what do you need? A caterpillar, a D5, you need a blade, you need a grater, what do you need? And he looks at him and he goes, no, a cat, meow, meow, hiss, hiss, so I can lick its ass and get the taste of these Newtons out of my mouth. So my name is Stephen Priest, and today I'm going to talk a little bit about just the history, my history, some of it, with the BNSF Railroad. And formerly the Santa Fe Railroad. I went to work for them actually during summer internships. And the summer internships they had all kinds of things. They had engineering, they had marketing, they even had some some what they called management trainee positions that were open. But because I had been a model railroader and I had dealt with a lot of the model railroaders that were within the company, within the Santa Fe at that point, I got to know a gentleman by the name of Russell Crump through the Santa Fe Modelers Organization, and Russell was the clearance engineer of the Santa Fe Railroad. And it was funny because Russell was a big guy. I mean, he was rather rotund, and it was always funny to me that he was the clearance engineer of the railroad. So, because it was funny because we would go operate at model railroads together, and he was rather wide, and we'd have to work our way around each other when we were going down the aisles while running the model railroad. And so the clearance engineer thing always kind of amusing to me internally. So Russell was a wonderful guy, and Russell worked with the engineering guy, a gentleman by the name of Steve Heath out of Chicago, who was the chief engineer at that time. And Steve brought me and a couple other guys in, interviewed us, and hired us to do internships. So we started the process of digitizing maps within the company. At that time, the Santa Fe Railway had been, and this was late 80s, early 90s, they didn't have enough computers. Computers were a relatively new thing. So they put us interns on a second shift. So we came in at about 4:30, interfaced with the people we were working with in the office, if they could tell us what to do and what we were going to be working on. And then we were basically in the office building at 4515 Candace Avenue by ourselves until like 2 in the morning. So thank goodness we were relatively mature and we weren't running around partying, but we really could have been quite ornery if we really would have wanted to be, because the building was just nobody there and it was completely open. So anyway, we behaved ourselves, and normally what they'd have us do is they were having us scan maps. So they had all these old jack physical maps that we were running through large format scanners, and then we would clean them up. In other words, we'd remove lines and dust and dirt and things like that, do a little color correction, give them the proper name, and then just save them to the server. So they were in the process of changing all their hard files over to digital files. Oddly enough, a number of years later, we would end up with all those hard files. The word came down to Dennis Morgar. That stuff was all to be gotten rid of, and he came to us on a Friday and said, hey, if you can have all this stuff out of here by Monday, no one will ask any questions. And when I say stuff, I mean a 30 by 30 file vault full of drawings and records and all kinds of stuff. And I was smart enough at that time and been around long enough to realize that, hey, yeah, this is a dump of material that he was told to put it in the dumpster, but he valued it enough that he was like, I wonder who we could get this to for a good home. And he had talked with Russell Crump and me about that. So I talked with Russell, and I was a young kid. We lived in a little teeny townhouse in Argentine, down right above where the Argentine yard is. We had no place to store anything, so everything went to Russell's house. Russell had it in his house, and for years. And subsequently after that, there were several other grand opportunities to gather materials. We went to Albuquerque and grabbed all the stuff from Albuquerque. We grabbed some stuff from Clovis. And so we were able to save a lot of material. That all went to Russell's house and kind of became the R.L. Crump or the Russell Crump Library. And that material then, eventually upon Russell's death, was passed to us, and we used that to do several books out of and things like that. Engineering services was a lot of fun, and we learned a lot of really cool things. I had a great set of mentors there, Paul Gabler, Mike Lawrence, a whole group of people that were just fantastic to work with. And they were a little ornery too, and they'd play little tricks on things eventually here and there. And oddly enough, I got a good friend of mine, Brad Voth, who is now CFO of our company as well. Brad went on board as well, and Brad ended up working and moving with the Santa Fe to Schaumburg Illinois, which is Chicago, to work in the tax department there. And I lost track of him for years when he had made that move. Maybe I'd call him once every 3 years and say, hey, are you still alive? What are you doing? But pretty much lost track of him after that. I eventually was hired on permanently with the Santa Fe to work in the engineering department. And when I did that, one of my first jobs was to work with the track geometry cars. The track geometry cars were in an interesting phase at that period of time because the railroads had just merged, the Santa Fe and the Burlington Northern. And each railroad had very different cars, track geometry cars, and very different philosophies. The Santa Fe Railway track geometry personnel were actually management. They were managers. I mean, they were non-union upper management people. And the former BN track geometry car people, they were just basically a lot of just kind of union managers. And so the Santa Fe pay scale was here and the BN pay scale was here. And so what the railroad did upon the merger is they did this with it and they leveled all the payment out, and consequently all the Santa Fe guys bailed because they were upper management. They went into other positions, and then they had to fill a whole bunch of positions really quickly with the merger. So bingo, I was able to slip into that job. And the track geometry cars were really an interesting concept. The point of them is literally to look at track geometry, which means the relationship of one rail to the other rail. And so the cars study, record, measure within tolerances, the gauge of the track, super elevation, which is, of course, one rail being higher than the other in a curve, cross level, which is the same thing except in a straightaway. In a straightaway, you don't want one rail higher than the other. That's a failure of cross level in a straightaway. And then dip. So if you're going along and all of a sudden you get this dip in your rail, you measure dip. And a whole bunch of other things. They also use a light slice technology, which shot lasers down on both sides of the railhead. And it was a strip laser. It was a little teeny narrow strip. And then they had cameras that were tuned to that frequency of laser that drew out the rail on the computer, digitized it and drew it out. So the laser shined on the rail from the sides, both sides, left and right camera, left and right laser, and it drew the entire railhead out. And it could measure it within 1,000th of an inch tolerance. So at track speed, which was 70 miles an hour when we ran the cars, it would literally digitize the entire rail base and you could tell what was wearing. And the point of that is that each consecutive trip you made over that territory, you would tell the geocar, hey, I'm at milepost so-and-so, and then the geocar knew where it was. And it would compare each trip with the last 5 trips over that territory. So you could tell how much the rail was wearing, and you could tell how fast it was wearing. So the company could extrapolate that data and program their rail replacement and their tie replacement programs off of that data, which was really cool. So that's the scientific side of things. With the merger, both railroads were doing this a little differently. So the major concern up front was to get both of the cars so they were reading data the same. In other words, to retrofit the cars, to equip the cars, and to calibrate the cars so that the B9 car, which was the former Burlington Northern car, and the Santa Fe 85 and 86 car, which was the other set of cars, could literally go over the same set of track and give you the same set of data. You can understand why that may be possibly important, because if you have 2 cars giving you 2 totally different sets of data, you have real issues. So we spent quite a bit of time in the Topeka shops at the Santa Fe where the passenger car servicing was, and the Santa Fe still has a building in Topeka that they do nothing but passenger car work. And that was where the cars were retrofitted. So they were lifted off their trucks, the trucks were resprung, they were recalibrated and reworked. New light slice technology boxes were added to the BN car, and a huge plethora of other things were added to the cars. And then we took the cars out between Lawrence and Topeka where there's a set of S-curves, ran them through all those curves and calibrated the cars until they were giving the exact same data, which was the goal. It was really cool basically having your own passenger cars that you ran across the railroad in. They were quite luxurious. They had a nice kitchen in them. They had a dining area in them, and then of course they either had the glass end car, which was the BN car, or they had the Santa Fe car had an end platform because it was an old car that had an open-ended observation end in it. So both cars were used pretty much interchangeably. The scheduling for the cars was set up and designed around the tons per operative mile. In other words, if more tonnage ran over a certain set of track, you had to test it more often. So we found ourselves like in the Powder River Basin a lot because of the tonnage. We found ourselves on the Santa Fe Transcon a lot because those are sections of track that get the most tonnage. We would generally get out on the branch lines once a year, like originally the line to Superior and some things like that. Superior, Nebraska, which is a Santa Fe grain branch. And we get out on those once a year. A lot of interesting things happen in the geocars. One of the cool things about the geocars is every single day was a different group of people. So let me explain how that worked, what the scheduling was. So my schedule was Monday through Friday, and I would fly to the cars on Monday. We would go out and shop for the cars, buy all the food and everything for the entire work, and equip the galley in the cars on Monday, wash all the windows, calibrate the computers, make sure everything was working fine, make sure the cars didn't need any maintenance. Then we would test Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, tie the cars up on Friday, do a little bit of tie down work, download the data, upload it to the headquarters of engineering, and then we would fly home on Fridays. So as we traveled around the system, the cars would be filled with the people in the territory that we were traveling over, the people that were responsible for the track work. And we got all kinds of interesting people in the car. We got gruff old nasty roadmasters, we got young guys that were willing to learn, and everything in between. And the stories were just absolutely hilarious sometimes of what happened on the geocars. We learned after a period of time, and we kept a logbook of what each group of roadmasters and their associated minions or crews liked. So when we would go, for instance, when we would go to the Powder River Basin, those guys like chili, so we'd put a big old bowl of chili on back in the galley. And of course, you know how chili is, it smells good, fills the whole car up. And the only problem with chili is you get a whole bunch of grown men in a passenger car with chili, and you have some issues with aroma, may I say. And the interesting thing about passenger cars is passenger cars don't have openable windows. So basically you have a sealed passenger car, and you have all the guys riding in the rear of the car, which is where the glass end is or the observation end is. And it's set up like a theater, so the seats are elevated, each seat elevated so you could see out of the car. And so what would happen is, you know, guys that would get gassy would basically go clear to the under end of the car, down next to the far door, and let go. The problem with that is the air intake system for the entire car was right above, in the ceiling, right above the rear door. So by the time the guy would get back to the end of the car where we were all riding, his essence was already there, let's put it that way. So, the guys were trying to be nice, they'd get up and go to the end of the car and let go, and unfortunately that's where the air intake was for the entire circulation system in the car. So that became quite the joke between a lot of guys on the car. The roadmasters and their road foremen and then track gang people would ride on the car, and depending on how they were taking care of their territory, between this city or this milepost and this milepost, they'd either have really good days or they've had bad days, because the purpose of the car was to look at the track work and find BNSF faults and then FRA faults. And the BNSF faults and tolerances were tighter than the FRA were. So in other words, the federal government's tolerances for what is a failure were wider or more lenient than the BNSFs. The BNSFs were tighter tolerances. And so when we were traveling over the territory, a lot of the times we'd get dip or cross level or whatever. And sometimes the roadmasters and things would really get pissed off, because what would happen is a lot of times they were having their budgets cut, so they couldn't get out and do the work they needed to do, yet they were being held to a standard. And so there were times when things were quite confrontational on the car. I remember a couple times we actually stopped the geocar, backed up and went over and tested again the same area, or actually stopped the train and got out and with levels and things and track gauges and physically measured the track, to make sure the car was reading. Because I remember some of the old guys, this thing isn't working, your car isn't working right, our track isn't that bad. And sure enough, we'd go out, we'd stop the car, back up to whatever milepost plus 100 feet, which is called an engineering station, was, go out and look, and sure enough, the rail was out of cross level, an inch and a half or whatever at that location. And sometimes you had to physically prove to them, and they would get quite PO'd at times, because obviously the track geometry cars were also kind of used to evaluate how well they were doing at their job, unfortunately. And so there were a lot of factors there, and there were times when people would get quite heated. Other times people were really good at what they did, or they had the funding to do what they needed to do, or they were managing well, or whatever the huge amount of things that allows them to do their job well. And they would do just fine, and they would have a good day. We learned again that each road manager, roadmaster, and crew kind of like different foods. And one time on the car, we had, and this was out of Lincoln, Nebraska, the roadmaster out of Lincoln, Nebraska really liked Fig Newtons. I mean, the guy loved Fig Newtons. So we had a list of what people liked, and we'd always try to buy it. So, keep them happy and, well fed. So we went to the store on Monday morning, me and Jim Sauvé, the other guy on the car, and we bought Fig Newtons for this roadmaster. Intended to buy Fig Newtons. When we got to the store, they were completely out of Fig Newtons, but they had all kinds of other Newtons, strawberry and blueberry and other things like this. So we're like, maybe he'll be okay with this. So we ended up buying blueberry or strawberry Newtons or something like that. So get back on the car, hit his territory. Of course, he goes back and gets the entire thing of Newtons, and he's kind of grumbling, why aren't these Fig Newtons, I mean, that's what I like. And we're like, hey man, I'm sorry they were all out of them. So he's like, he cracks it open. And so he's eating these all day long as we're coming from Alliance down into Lincoln. So we're testing all day long. And all day long, the road masters, road foremen, anytime we had a track issue or anything else, they would be radioing all of their guys that were out in the trucks that do the maintenance of way work. So, hey, at milepost 53, that sign's fallen over. We need to get that sign, straightened. Hey, we've got water sitting in the ditch at milepost, blah, blah, blah. We need to get, a backhoe out there and get that water so it's drained out of our... Because the geocars were the opportunity for those higher up managers of maintenance away to get out on their territory and actually visually see what was happening on the territory. So it was also an evaluative process for the guys below them, that had 10 or 15 miles of track assigned to them. It allowed the higher ups to see how they were doing. So it was kind of, in a lot of ways, it was a stressful situation. That's why all the eating went on. Part of that was because of the stress. So all day long, the road foreman, the roadmaster were barking the orders to their guys. Hey, we need a machine here. We've got cross level in this milepost. We have a failure here. We need to get that taken care of right now. So they're barking all day. And so we're pretty used to that. So one of the funniest stories was, again, coming into Lincoln, Nebraska, we were about 4 miles out. And the roadmaster basically, turned to one of his guys and said, I need a cat. I need a cat right now. And of course, his guy's like, okay, what do you need? A Caterpillar, a D5, you need a blade, you need a grader, what do you need? And he looks at him and he goes, no, a cat, meow, meow, hiss, hiss, so I can lick its ass and get the taste of these Newtons out of my mouth. It was hilarious. The car erupted and it was extremely funny, and it just kind of was a relief right before we got into the whole day, got rid of all the pressure from the day, because those guys were under the gun, and our car is what created that to them, basically. So it was a tool, but it was also a source of great stress and pressure for the road foremen and roadmasters. And that's my story. I'm sticking to it.